So, everyone, here I am again after I disappeared for a while. Yep, here I am again after many weeks and a long day of homeschooling. Hope everyone had a great beginning of the new year and wasn't too disappointed in the recent debate between former President Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. Once again, I'm going to start my video by talking about not the United States of America, but rather our neighbor to the north, our cousin country, the Great White North. The Great White North that's not so great, not because it lacks greatness, but because of its failed and foiling leadership. I'm here to talk to you today once again about Canada. Now, why Canada when I could simply do my soliloquy on the recent debate, my thoughts and views on it? Well, because I think that, especially as of late, as of recently, that a lot of what happens in the United States is part and parcel reminiscent of what has been going on in Europe for decades and what has become the standard and the new normal for our neighbor to the north, Canada, at least since 1968, where at first the population was forced, and I stress and emphasize the word forced, to drink the Kool-Aid, at least as a trial or temporary basis, and which has been shoved down their throat for so many decades that the people have now bought the rhetoric and believe it. Though there are those that still vocally show their exasperation. But let's start with Canada. Canada most recently re-elected its Prime Minister Trudeau. Many because he's French, and you very well, as much as I know, just like myself, all of you know that Canada is primarily an English and French-speaking country. So you throw in a Frenchman, and now he's got at least half the population's support. Not because he's capable, but because he's a countryman. And because he seems to be good looking and quite articulate. But we're not looking to date him. We're looking for him to run the country and not run it into the ground as he has been doing, which is why so many Canadians are now throwing their support, or at least intelligent, well-informed, and in the loop Canadians are now clamoring and clambering for change and throwing their support behind Pierre Poilievre. Canada's, Donald Trump, or version of Donald Trump. And he is the better candidate. And I do follow him, although not to the extent that I do follow Donald Trump. But again, so far, so good. But there's one problem with Mr. Poilievre, and it has nothing to do with him or his policy. It has to do with the fact that Canada has no term limits. So the power is placed in the hands of the masses, where oftentimes, or most oftentimes, the M is silent. And I ask myself repeatedly, and you should ask yourselves the same thing. If we are not careful, no term limits will come into play in this country. Remember, England does not have term limits. Queen is queen until her death. King is king until his death. And Canada can re-elect Justin Trudeau or anyone else over and over and over again with no term limits. And it may be coming to a theater near you and me soon if we are not careful, especially about whom we vote for in November. There's lots of policies from Canada that have already made their way across the border. And I've mentioned those in previous videos, including Kamala's stance, or the Kamala Biden stance, on socialized medicine or Medicare for all, which, by the way, as I've stipulated again in various videos, is not free. Like public schools, it comes out of your taxes and on tax dollars that you are forced to pay through comestibles, etc. The paying for bags at the grocery store and other retailers. That was a Canadian thing before it was an American thing. And if it hasn't come to a state near you, it will be coming there fairly soon. After all, how else are we going to pay for all these people there illegally ushering over the border while I am still in the process of trying to secure my Canadian status after almost a decade of doing it the right way? But I digress. We face the same plight as Canada if we are not careful. And I like to talk about Canada because if we just shift our sights a little to the north, we can see what will happen to America if we allow Kamala to take office. Whether it's Kamala and Walz or Biden or Newsom, they're all in bed together. And they take their cues from the Queen and from people like Justin Trudeau, who want to socialize, if not communize, nations. And I can't think personally of any way to ensure their own power and success than by omitting term limits so that they can secure their power for generations on end. And there's no caveat or stipulation that mandates that they cannot continue to serve, or rather underserve, the people. With that said, I am astounded, and I'm going to read off a cue card because I can't remember everything. But Kamala in the debate and henceforth has continued repeatedly to claim that she grew up in a middle-class family. And she kind of hints at the fact that she grew up in America as an American in California, which is a radical state to begin with. One of the most beautiful states in the entire United States, a state that I always look forward to moving to one day and now fear visiting. But I digress again. Kamala claims that she grew up in a middle-class family and would have you believe a middle-class family in California. But that is a falsehood. Kamala did not grow up anywhere in the United States and therefore does not hold in her heart and soul American values. She did not grow up with American values. Kamala Harris grew up in Canada, a country that has been socialized since 1968. Prior to 68, Canada was the mirror image, or almost exactly the mirror image, of America, the United States. The country took her cues from us. We were the older sibling, the older cousin, the mentor, the country that set the stage for our neighbor to the north. They had private insurance. I can't quote specifically, but I'm pretty sure they had term limits. They ran their country the way America ran America, the way our leaders ran our country. They led their country exactly the same way or very similarly until someone had the bright idea of introducing social programs and paradigms. And since 1968, Canada has suffered under the thumb and rule of essentially the Queen and those in power who want to make decisions for the people. They want to be in charge of the people. Now, while in many instances I can't disagree that people do need to be controlled, because when you leave people under their own devices, they drink heavily, drive drunk, eat edibles, you know the kind, the marijuana edibles, smoke up, drink up, party on, like, party on, Garth. So to some small degree, I could see why the people in power want to control the people, because the people haven't proven to be savvy enough to control themselves, to behave like the adults in the room. And so when one cannot behave like an adult in the room, someone has to enter the room, preferably an adult, to take control of the situation. And the politicians have assigned themselves that duty, the duty of the older sibling, the duty of the parent or grandparent, the overseer of the people who are failing themselves miserably. But still, that infringes on the fundamental foundation of why our nations, especially in North America, were formed. For the people, by the people, with guaranteed, yes, guaranteed freedoms and the right to make mistakes. Now, again, depends on how severe the mistake is. You cannot drive drunk and take someone else's life arbitrarily and carelessly into your hands. My husband, my mother, my child does not deserve to die or be maimed because you are irresponsible. So again, we have to draw boundaries. There's that four-letter word again, boundaries, which we don't seem to like on our borders. But it is essential. If there are no boundaries, then people are free to act as politely or as uncivilly as they feel. There are no rules, there are no regulations, there is no law and order, and we will have mayhem. So again, we have to be careful how we say or how we interpret giving people freedoms. But for the most part, people are entitled, adult people are entitled to their opinions and to their freedoms, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom to smoke if they want to, but don't kill me. Don't come into my house and bring your ugly cigarette habit into my home. But you are free to kill yourself if you want. I'm not going to stop you. I will try to educate you, to try to realign your thinking, but I'm not going to try to stop you, especially if you are an adult. But again, I digress. Kamala Harris was raised in Canada. And as I noted just a few seconds ago, a very liberal country, as liberal as Europe, because it does take its cues and its programs and its paradigms directly from the Queen or the monarchy, because it does fall under the umbrella of England. Yes, it has established its independence for quite a while now, but it's still kind of Eurocentric, which is a beautiful thing. America has forgotten what beauty, true beauty really looks like, and we've become a crap hole. But that's a whole other point. Canada has remained essentially Eurocentric, and in a large part, that's a beautiful, wonderful thing. They've retained their architectural integrity, their beautiful buildings. It's starting to deteriorate now. It really has. I've seen it over the past decade. It's deteriorating and rapidly, more rapidly than I'm comfortable with. But America has exceeded that limit. And America is in dire need of being rebuilt because we've forgotten what we stand for, what a great country we were and what a great country we could be. But I digress again. Canada has been fairly liberal and on its way to communism since 1968, especially with the lack of term limits and the politicians constantly overpowering the people and forcing their agenda and their ideologies on them, regardless of the population's point of view. So Kamala was raised in Canada, not necessarily by an authentically middle-class family. After all, she grew up in a neighborhood, as it's noted on the internet. I'm taking these facts off the internet, and no, I'll admit I have not fact-checked them, but where there's smoke, there's typically fire. She grew up in a neighborhood back in the day, because she's in my age category, late 50s, she grew up in a neighborhood where homes at that point in time were $1 million. And most of us would tend to think that $1 million home today is a pretty expensive home. So can you imagine how expensive that type of home seemed 40 or 30 some odd years ago, $1 million went much further then than it does today. So she did not, by any stretch of the imagination, if these facts in fact are true, she did not in any way, shape, or form grow up in a middle class neighborhood. You know what a middle class neighborhood is? It's the neighborhood I grew up in, where there was one family who had a pool, an above ground pool, and they were the king of the hill. Everyone knocking on their door. We were friends with these kids. We all played outside. We've kept in touch, but everyone was constantly knocking on their door, hoping mom or dad would invite us in for an hour of pool time. Otherwise, the rest of us kids would wait for the firemen to come by in the neighborhood, turn on the fire hydrant so we could wedge a can in it to make the water spray so we could put on our swimsuits or swim trunks and get wet. That, my friends, is a middle class neighborhood. Nobody had a silver spoon in their mouth, including the kids who were king of the hill with the above ground pool. Nobody had an in-ground pool. Nobody had a grotto and a swim-up bar. Nobody had diving boards and all these other luxurious amenities that children today take for granted. So Kamala grew up in a Canadian neighborhood where homes were $1 million back then. Her parents were both highly educated and I'm pretty sure highly compensated professionals. Her father was a professor, and her mother was a bioscientist. And both these professions are highly revered and highly paid to this day. So I don't know that I would consider Kamala a middle-class kid, not to mention that she had a nanny. How many middle-class children, especially in our day, 30 and 40 plus years ago, how many middle-class kids did any of us know in common middle-class neighborhoods that had a nanny? Not many. In fact, I don't recall one. I would dare say that having a nanny is not so commonplace in a middle-class family and in a middle-class neighborhood, even today. It might be getting more commonplace because salaries are typically better today, but things are also more expensive today as well. So I'm not quite sure, especially back then, that any middle-class family had a nanny. And like I said, not even many middle-class families today have a nanny. So Kamala might tell you she grew up in a middle-class family and that her mother worked. But the type of work her mom did, she wasn't a cashier at a diner like my mother was. She wasn't even a teacher in an elementary school. She was a bioscientist, a very highly compensated profession. Kamala has never been and will never be one of us. And that's the key to remember. She has always been part of the elite class. She has always considered herself better than us. And she has done whatever it takes to climb up the corporate ladder. Hint, hint, wink, wink, nod, nod. With that said, you have to understand Kamala's agenda. Not only is she part of the elite class, she has grown up in Canada. And her end goal is to turn America, if not into Canada, into Venezuela. You have to understand and speak to people who fled communist China about why they fled communist China. And I happen to know someone personally. And they have noted that Canada is more quickly than the US, although the US is currently on the similar trajectory, turning into communist China and Venezuela. Kamala's agenda is to radicalize everything we know and love, to radicalize the nation. And Trudeau, on his third term, That's why many Canadians want Pierre Poilievre. They want radicalism out because they haven't just introduced radicalism today into Canada or 4 years ago. They have been coping with radicalism and the destruction and the deterioration of their nation since 1968. And that's a pretty darn long time. And so the people are feeling the burden and the ramifications much heavier than we are. And their eyes are much more wide open because this is not some shiny new thing that they're introducing to Canadians today. It is a tried and true part of their society that they have grown tired and weary of. For us, it's the shiny thing. But for them, it's the shiny thing that now needs some polishing. And they're ready to give it up. They're ready to polish it. They want something new. And we want that old garbage that they're throwing out. How sad is that? So Kamala's agenda is to take up where Trudeau is leaving off, perhaps. If he gets reelected, he'll continue to do more of the same. But to pick up where Trudeau and the rest of them have left off. She wants to socialize and communize America. And if people look to Canada and say, well, how can they reelect Trudeau? If people are that unhappy, how did Trudeau get reelected? I know there's no term limits, but if the people are not happy, how did he get reelected? Well, I'd like to tell you a story. Sit back, pull up a blankie, and listen. There once was a man, nice looking, outgoing man. Man had his own business, not necessarily a millionaire or a billionaire, but a very solid business with the potential to make hundreds of thousands, to make more than hundreds of thousands. A very hard worker, a good worker. This man was looking for a companion. After several failed relationships and many years on his own, a relationship became an essential part of his life, especially as he was growing older, embarking and embracing his middle-age years. This particular man had friends who he knew for decades, who tried over and over to introduce him to the right female. Females who were also in his same age category, who were equally, if not more successful, who were team players, who had all the qualities and qualifications he would seek out for himself and more. But unfortunately, due to this man's complacency and laziness and lack of self-confidence, he didn't want to extend himself to go that extra mile for these women who were mature, secure partners in life. Not only female friends, girlfriends, etc., but true to the core partners in life. People who could have his back while maintaining their own autonomy, who were accomplished women with their own homes, with their own cars, with their own careers, who had raised their own children effectively. But because they were out of his comfort zone, be it the next town over or 3 hours out of town or 5 hours out of town, it was too much burden to place on him. He wanted the food cooked in his mouth. This man wanted immediate gratification without putting in the time, the energy, or the work. He didn't want to travel too far for a partner in life, for a true partner in life. He approached it as an adolescent would approach it. I want someone who's sort of attractive, who finds me attractive. She doesn't have to be the hottest babe under the sun, but she has to be appealing. She has to have certain qualities, but she has to be local because I don't want to go out of my way. But if anyone has ever started a business or done anything of importance and relevance, you know it takes hard work, lots of energy, and it does require an individual to go out of his or her way. Nothing in life, nothing good in life comes easy. Things that come too easy are generally not that good, but I digress. So despite this gentleman's friend's efforts to introduce him repeatedly over and over again to a partner that had so much to offer, his laziness and complacency landed him in the company of an individual. And no one can fault this person, because at a certain age, we all have baggage. Some smaller baggage, some larger baggage, but we all come with baggage. So the woman that this individual met had baggage that supposedly took such a toll that she had lost all her confidence and her maturity. She became part of a mentality that said that you cannot speak to men outside of your relationship because it would be flirting. She would not allow this man to maintain his previous friendships, especially with other women, because she felt threatened by them. I guess her previous husband had left her or abandoned her or took off with someone else. But many women and men have been down that road, and we don't let it affect us in the same way, or we try to get over certain hurdles. But apparently this woman could not and did not. And when this man attempted to retain his former relationships with both men and women, she became very threatened and put demands on him. And I won't go into specifics, but these demands prevented him from working outside of his immediate area, the immediate town they lived in and worked in. They lived separately, but the immediate town they lived in. It prevented him from communicating, even via Facebook, with other, especially women who he had befriended for decades, to the point where they both had to seek therapy. Well, 2 years into the relationship, they were still in therapy, still trying to get this woman help for her skewed purview on life, for her skewed purview on relationships, for her lack of understanding of healthy relationships. And yet, despite warnings from friends and family around him, and I suppose, though I don't know for sure, can't prove it, I guess under the duress of this woman, he proposed. Now, there were many warnings by, like I said, friends and family not to propose. In fact, someone advised this individual that you don't consider a person cured before you know the medicine has worked. You have to wait for the medicine to take effect before you can deem the person cured. And since they were still in therapy, both individually and as a couple, for issues that had remained unresolved, didn't seem like the medicine was doing its job. And so those around him suggested that he wait to get married, to wait to see if the medicine had taken hold, to see if it would do what it was supposed to do, to see if the medicine did what it was supposed to do. But because she happened to be local and convenient and would cater to his needs, and required very little effort on his part, and required very few demands from her, except for the fact of going to therapy to alleviate her of her insecurities, it was a comfortable, convenient answer to his loneliness. And as my mother, who you probably saw walk behind me just a few seconds ago, would say, desperation is never a good thing. Desperation leads to desperate decisions, and desperate decisions are not always good decisions. So why do I tell this story? Because this man did marry this woman. And when friends reached out to see how things were going, the answer was, well, not as bad as they once were, but not really as good as they could be or as good as they were in the beginning of therapy. They're actually haven't even stabilized. It's some days it's okay, and some days it's pretty bad. And everybody but this man can see the ultimate freight train coming, because nobody can live like this forever, even if you're a senior citizen. Heck, Joan Rivers divorced her husband in her 80s. So if you're in your 40s, 50s, or 60s, and you hope to have a pretty decent life ahead of you, it becomes very difficult to live under that kind of oppressive thinking and oppression. And so the freight train is coming. Why? Because this man acted out of lack of vision. This man acted out of laziness. And this man acted out of desperation. And that's never a good thing. And that is exactly where the American people are today. That is why I tell the story. The American people have drank the Kool-Aid. They have been led to believe that we can't look outside the box, look outside our town or our state for another woman or leader. Donald Trump has been painted as the bad guy because he's not the convenient date, the convenient boyfriend like in the story that is local in our town. He is not that person. He is the person who will challenge you. Like the women friends of this man had found, women who had their own careers, their own lives, their own this, their own that, which proved to be, for him at least at the time, too much to handle. So Donald Trump, for many people, is too much to handle. That doesn't mean he's wrong. That doesn't mean he's not worth it. It means for them, he's too much to handle. And so they want the convenient answer, the simple answer. Look, Kamala is Black and she's Indian. So she's a quote unquote minority in two facets. Though I don't really consider anyone a minority because no one is beneath me. In North America and really across the globe these days, anyone has the chance to succeed. It takes tenacity and determination, and it's not easy for anyone. Yes, some people have it much easier than others, depending on the family background, family history, who they know, what they know, how much money they have. But that holds true for people who are Black, who are white, who are Asian, who are Indian, who are Italian, who are Greek, who are Polish. It goes across the board. And so I don't see as anyone beneath me when it comes to opportunity. I see opportunity as a product of self-determination and hard work and tenacity. But again, I digress. But Kamala has been painted as this hero or heroine or whatever. And she is a minority. She's half Black and she's half Indian. And she supposedly came from a middle-class family, which, as we debunked before, she did not. And that she has everyone's interests at heart. Well, she does not have everyone's interest at heart because she made her mark primarily because she had an affair with a politician many decades before who was a married man. And threw caution to the wind that he was married and that his wife was expecting at the time. So where are her values? Where are her morals? And do they align with yours or mine or ours or America's? That's the key question we need to ask. And if she can't control her own life, how in the world is she going to control yours and mine? And how is she going to control our country? She didn't have this man's wife's best interest at heart. She did not have this man's children's best interest at heart. You know whose interest she had at heart? Her own. And that's not uncommon in the world of politics. But if you are going to malign and debase Donald Trump for putting his interests ahead of others, when it comes to business, he is fierce. And in business, you have to often, not always, you have to have boundaries. Like I said in the very beginning, you have to have boundaries and limitations. But in business, you kind of have to look out for your business. And Donald Trump is a businessman. And the same way he looks out for his businesses, he will look out for the nation and inevitably for you and me. Kamala Harris has never looked out for anybody but herself. And like Joe Biden, she tells a host of mythological, fabricated stories, like uncles who get eaten by cannibals, in order to paint themselves in a light that is more palatable to the people, because they see the people as puppets and they don't give us an ounce of credit for being able to smell the BS. And that's pretty sad. And it's this desperation, the desperation in Canada back in 1968 and maybe a few years after, when people thought, okay, if I can't afford my own health care and it's expensive, the government will give it to me. The government cares about me. They're doing this for me. The government is showing their love, their care, and their concern for me. But what they don't tell you is that you are paying for the medical, paying for it through taxes that in Toronto is over 13%, in other provinces over 15%. What they don't tell you is that there will be long wait times to see specialists in Canada, whereas in the United States, the wait times are getting longer, much longer, and I see a lot of policies coming over the border that I'm not happy about. But to each their own. Well, if you're that stupid to buy the rhetoric, then I guess to each their own. But you have to be aware. Canadians are placed on waiting lists, kind of like people waiting in soup lines for a piece of bread. They're waiting in lines to get treatment for ailments. And yeah, if you have a significantly serious disease that is immediately diagnosable, then they will push you to the head of the line. But how many other people are on that line? And if they're not sure what you have, how long are you going to wait before they push you through the line to find out what you have, only to find out that what you had was something serious, but now it's advanced because they didn't diagnose you prior. So it's a very convoluted, confounded situation, which they want to bring here, except we have 300 million more people than does our neighbor to the north. So if it's a disaster there, it is going to be a cataclysmic catastrophe here. Again, my purview, my view on the debate is that it doesn't matter who won. Personally, I think Donald Trump won. Yes, he lost his cool. Yes, he did not keep himself poised. But how many of us can be poised if people continue to slander us, to take shots at us that are untrue, and to malign us simply for trying to do the best for the nation, for our family, for whatever? I personally think he did compose himself, because if I was on stage with Kamala, I probably would have thrown a shoe. I probably would have thrown a shoe. And I would have brought up the fact that she intervened, let's be polite, intervened in a person's marriage to elevate her social status. I would have brought up the fact that she grew up in a wealthy neighborhood in Canada. I would have continually pointed the finger that her values are not American, but rather Canadian, and have been bastardized by a socialist and communist paradigm. So if you want to know what I think of the debate, I think it was senseless, because anybody who cannot understand what an atrocity it has been for America, whether you live there or not, because it will affect you. It will affect the global stage. And if your country is already suffering, it will suffer more. It is an atrocity that people don't open their eyes, but have their eyes wide shut to the fact that this administration has destroyed a country that was once a leader on the world stage, and that will bring it down, that it will not only destroy it, it will bury it, and it will come after your countries too. Finally, and with all that said, and I hope this edits well, because again, I'm doing this from home after homeschooling, I hope that my message came across, not because I want to impose my opinion, but because I really do care. And I'm tired of watching the world globally suffer at the hands of autocratic idiots who want to impose obscene ideologies on nations and across the globe. So I would implore you to pick your leaders, not based on their looks or their status or how they dress or any of the aforementioned qualities. This is not high school. We're not picking a prom queen or king. We're picking a world leader, and a world leader that will impact other nations and will impact the world stage. Be savvy, be tuned in, and put your feelings aside. You don't have to like the owner of a restaurant to eat there if they serve good food, good quality food, good wholesome quality food. You don't have to like your postman if he delivers your mail on time or she delivers your mail on time. Choose someone who will get the job done, who is ready, willing, and able to do the work he or she was hired to do, to provide you with safety in your own home, in your own community, in your own nation, to provide you a better life and a better future for not only you, but for generations to come.